Welcome to Theory of Pets. I'm a passionate pet owner with a drive to help others like me uncover the truth about the pet industry and what goes on behind the scenes.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Connor Knight. I'm the president of Top Dog Tips. I help our YouTuber Samantha run the podcast and the YouTube channel. Today we have Miss Bennett here, Robin Bennett. She's been a dog behavioral trainer for over 30 years with her and her business partner. And we have a lot of stuff to cover today as far as how her new venture, also called Ruffly Speaking, was started, and just some of the ins and outs as far as behavioral training and behavioral awareness for dogs for pet owners. And we're going to be sharing some insight for you here. And I'm super excited. Thank you so much for coming on today, Robin.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm excited to be here and talk to your audience.
So let's start off with the first question. Tell everyone a little bit about your story and what you did before Ruffly Speaking. I know I mentioned that you were a behavioral trainer, but how that started and then how it became to now known as Ruffly Speaking.
So I was one of these people that turned a hobby into a career. I actually didn't set out to do everything I'm doing other than the fact that I was interested in dogs. I was actually in the Marine Corps at the time. I retired from the Marine Corps. But while I was in the Marine Corps, I took the opportunity to go to a dog training class because I wanted to learn how to train dogs. And that turned out to be a great thing. I came back and started doing that on the side. Turns out people wanted to pay me for that service. So I ended up going into the Marine Corps Reserves and starting my dog training career that way. So that was about 30 years ago. I'm a certified professional dog trainer. I had my own dog training company in Virginia for about 18 years. And I had several trainers, and we did primarily family pet dog training. So really helping pet parents get to know their dogs and build a relationship with them and have a good family pet. That was our entire goal. During that time as a dog trainer, I started a dog daycare. And this was back when dog daycares were not popular, were not well known. The dog parks didn't exist. It's kind of hard to think about that now. But when I started, I was talking to people about why they might want to bring their dog to a daycare rather than right now where you have people that are looking for daycares actively. And through that, I learned a lot more about keeping dogs safe and off-leash play. And I ended up, long story short, writing a couple of books about how to do that and partnering with a person named Susan Briggs, who's now my business partner for a company that we formed called the Dog Gurus. The Dog Gurus actually helps pet care businesses launch, grow, and profit. So we help dog daycare boarding facilities keep the dogs safe and run successful businesses. And through that company, we finally said, we've been taking all of our knowledge and helping pet businesses. We need to help the pet parents as well because they're instrumental to being advocates for their dogs. So that was how Ruffly Speaking really got started. It's just a sub branch of the Dog Gurus.
That's interesting. I was going to ask also because I did not know that you were in the Marine Corps, but, my dog and my dad's dog, we had someone train both of them, and then he had a partner who recently had came on at the time, I think it was about 2 years ago, who actually trained dogs for, I think it was the Marine Corps, or it might have been the Army. So I guess I wanted to ask, do they have that kind of program now, and maybe they just didn't back then at the time?
They still do. The military does still do train military working dogs. Most of them are actually trained by the Air Force and then at Lackland Air Force Base. And then the different services have those dogs after they've been trained. So all of the services have military working dogs. They also have contracted dogs as well. I did none of that in the Marine Corps. I was actually a logistics officer. The only dog I trained in the Marine Corps, I was stationed at 8th and I, which is the oldest post of the Marine Corps. And it's a ceremonial post. So they do a lot of events for VIPs. And it's very much a ceremonial post where they're trying to show off the Marine Corps, and they have a mascot, a bulldog there. And I actually did train that dog and actually selected one of the previous mascots that was up there. But that was cool. A bulldog, not German Shepherd or Belgian Malinois or anything like that. That dog was primarily for public relations.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So, is there any particular reason that you didn't decide to? Because I think there's some people that decide to stick with dog training and then stick with the Marine Corps, with the branch of the military that they're with. Is there a particular reason?
The main reason for me is I actually went into the Marine Corps as an officer.
Mm-hmm.
It's enlisted Marines that actually work with the dogs.
Got it.
So
Okay.
if I had gone into any field dealing with the working dogs, I would have just been in charge of the Marines who were actually handling the working dogs.
Got it.
So that wasn't really, for me, it wasn't really an option because I wanted to do the hands-on work with the dogs.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I was just curious. How would your sessions go with clients? Walk me through like what your process was with, like, let's say someone like me, and the questions you would ask them when you would work with individuals, because that whole process is interesting because it sounds behavioral training sounds different than like someone who would train a dog how to walk properly on the leash. So walk me through that.
Well, we did a lot of what I would consider basic household manners. So
Okay.
sit down, stay, walking on a loose leash. But I would typically start with what the pet parent wanted. So a great example was for some people, they don't care if their dog jumps, particularly little dogs. There's
Mm-hmm.
100 reasons I could tell you why maybe it's a good idea not to let your dog jump. But for some people, it doesn't bother them. And
Yeah.
so I wasn't going to spend my time, trying to force you to train your dog to do something you didn't really care about.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing, healing, which is really walking right by your side. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people don't care about healing. I personally don't work with my dog to heal very often. I work on loose leash walking
Mm-hmm.
so they can walk a little bit ahead of me as long as they're not dragging me down the street.
Yeah.
So it's really looking at, what are your goals? For some people, if you live in a big city, healing and walking right by your side might be a really important skill. But for people who are maybe in the suburb or maybe in the country, that's not really that important. So I would really just start with what are your goals for your dog? What activities do you want to do? Because again, some people just want a family pet that can be around their children and be around their family members,
Mm-hmm.
and that's great. And other people, like for me, for instance, I'm actually in my RV right now. I wanted a dog that I could have to travel. So
Mm-hmm.
there's some additional skills the dog needs to have if they're going to be traveling in a car and traveling in an RV and going
Mm-hmm.
to a wide range of places
Yeah.
and seeing all kinds of new people. And I don't want a dog that's barking a lot because that's disturbs other people in the RV park. So
Yeah.
it's just really looking at what are the goals you have and then looking at how we can help you reach those goals through some training and relationship building.
So walk me through like a little tidbit of like because it sounds like in that scenario, recall is really important, and like recall would be seriously important if you're for me, for example, my dog, I think I probably use some different methods, using the education I got from the dog trainer I use, but trying to get her to heel and make sure that she wouldn't bark or lunge at a dog crossing the street. How would you typically, is the process as straightforward as just like, trying to reward them when they pay attention to you? How would you train a dog that would like bark at other dogs that are across the street and you're just trying to enjoy your walk?
Yeah, a lot of it is building the relationship between you and the dog. So the dog looks to the pet parent for guidance. And specifically with dogs that might work it themselves up into really getting overly excited, or whether they want to play or they just are scared or whatever, where they're barking at other dogs, I start right away rewarding my dog for paying attention to me anytime they're on a walk. So you'll have that situation where you're just walking your dog and your dog just might casually look at you for no reason whatsoever. I would reward that.
Yeah.
If you do that often enough, your dog starts checking in with you more and more often. And then I would do it very specifically. Like when my dog was a puppy, he didn't bark at other dogs, but I was really, really observant when we would walk by dogs or they were on the dogs were on the other side of the street. I would just constantly talk to him, reward him, So he started to think, gosh, every time we walk by dogs, my mom gives me lots of chicken. And so he started to see other dogs, and those dogs to him predicted the presence of food from me. So as soon as he would see a dog, he would go, oh, there's a dog over there, I'm getting chicken. So it's really building those associations the way you want them to be built, rather than just going, well, he's not barking, so I'll just keep walking on, because then you can start building, the dog can start building bad behaviors without you really even realizing. So a lot of being proactive is really important with dog training.
Got it. Okay. That's interesting. My dogs too, I still think like for example, I was educated by this dog trainer that he trained dogs on slip leads, and and then, my dad's dog, who was very high energy, he would use a prong collar because the dog was really high energy. My dad, both of us work, so we necessarily don't always have as much time. Or I guess it really depends on how disciplined you are, because I know it takes a lot of time and it's constant work. So I guess what I was going to ask was, what are your thoughts on training dogs on slip leads, prong collars? I've heard that some people believe that training them on a harness is the best, but you have to be very skilled with it because they don't feel as much feedback.
Right. So there's kind of two different things that you're talking about. One is training and one is management. So for me, there are tools. A leash is one of them. Like when you're out trying to teach your dog to do something, you're going to do some training, but you're probably going to have a leash on the dog so the dog doesn't run away. That's management. The leash is doing nothing other than keeping your dog from running away from you.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of management tools. I mean, another example is a baby gate. Like in your house, you might want to hopefully you do want to train your dog not to go to the bathroom in the house. And you're going to train that with very specific steps, feeding on a schedule and taking the dog out regularly and rewarding them when they go to the bathroom outside, and preventing them from having access to the whole house by using baby gates. So the baby gates are just management. The baby gates are doing nothing to train your dog other than managing the environment and helping you to do the right things to train your dog. And that's the same with any tools, whether it's prong collar, a harness, a slip lead, a choke collar. I tend to use harnesses more than anything else. There's also head collars like gentle leaders, which I have used in the past.
Is that called
all
a
of those
halter?
Are right, the head halter. But all of those are management tools to help you do the training, with the goal of being that you could just eventually walk your dog without those tools. Obviously, you're still going to use a leash because it's required in most places, but you're trying to get the dog to respond without the need for punishment or that kind of thing.
Force.
And because the dog understands what they're doing. But that doesn't negate the fact that there are management tools that sometimes are needed. My preference, and I did train initially with choke collars and prong collars. I haven't used those now in like 20 years because I just feel like you can train the dog with other tools that I find are better at keeping that relationship strong between you and the dog. So I do recommend front clip harnesses, especially some head halters if they're used properly. Obviously leashes and regular. Usually the collars I use are just nylon or leather collars. So all of those things I would recommend.
Interesting. I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about that off air, because I use a slip lead only because that's what I was trained to use. Would you recommend, if you're training your dog how to walk properly, or at least how to in a way to where you both are enjoying the walk, is what I'm trying to say? And would you recommend that people always be, if you're going to be doing that, the best case scenarios or the best, most effective method is reward training? Would you recommend that people always have treats on them? Like as far as like a little pocket?
I would recommend that during the training process. I do recommend using treats or a toy, depending on what motivates your dog the most, during the training process. And it does take a while, but if you figure your dog's going to be, 9, 10, 12, 15 years old, then that first year, because I usually recommend that training process actually takes about a year for most dogs, whether it's a puppy or maybe you just got a brand new dog. that you rescued that's older. Either way, I would generally say for a year, you need to be focused on taking the dog out, because the thing is, when anytime you and your dog are together, the dog is learning something. They're
Mm-hmm.
either learning they can do whatever they want, or they're learning whatever you're teaching them. And so it does get to be a pain at times where you're thinking, oh, I can't just go for a walk because I got to constantly be helping my dog learn. But that's really the best way to do it. I'm more of an advocate of just train your dog when you're doing stuff with them, as opposed to saying, okay, we got to set aside an hour just to do training,
Mm-hmm.
because then that just adds an hour of stuff for you to do.
Yeah.
I would just say incorporate training into the day-to-day activities that you're already doing with your dog. But I do recommend using treats or a toy or
Mm-hmm.
whatever motivates your dog. For some dogs, it's just like, I had one dog that really, really loved bubbles, and they rewarded their dog by blowing bubbles, like
And he
dog
would like
safe
bite it in the
bubbles.
air. I've seen dogs do that. That's
Yeah.
so funny.
Yeah.
That's
So, I mean, it's
hilarious.
just really about finding what works best for your dog. For some dogs, they do really work off of praise and petting, but most dogs find a little bit more reward from like a high value food that they don't get very often.
Very true. My dog is one of those ones that will not stop eating even though they should. Like, there's dogs that like my dad's dog won't eat very much, but my dog will eat no matter at one point, like no matter what time of day, even if they just had a full meal, they'll keep eating. But okay, so let's start digging into Roughly Speaking. Why did you end up creating Roughly Speaking after all this experience you've had with training people individually and training actually business owners of doggy daycare? Why Roughly Speaking?
Primarily because my goal always has been, even when I started my own training company and when we started the Dog Gurus to help pet care businesses, I always had a passion for making sure that we were understanding the dogs and being the dog's advocate. And the only way you can do that is if you understand a little bit about how dogs think and learn. So I really strongly believe that if pet parents truly understand their dogs, truly can read the canine body language, they can make better decisions for their dogs. I also see, I mean, the joke among trainers is that if you get 3 dog trainers in a room, the only thing they'll agree on is that the other 2 are wrong, that one of them is wrong. So there is a ton of information out there that runs the gamut of how to train your dogs. I mean, you look up any dog training issue and you'll find 1,000,001 ways to do that. And I think some of them, there's a lot of ways you can work with your dogs, but I do think some of them help to build a relationship better than others.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm a big advocate of building that relationship between the pet parent and the dog and making sure that you're looking at everything you're doing through that lens. But a lot of it just takes education, and pet parents, I've learned so much by being around thousands and thousands of dogs. And I just want to help pet parents understand, because it's not rocket science. I mean, this stuff is not hard to understand. It's just that nobody really teaches it. So our passion is really helping pet parents understand their dog better, learn how they can have fun with their dog, and their dog is not frustrating them all the time, and wanting to get that information out to them.
So it's safe to say that what you saw was missing was that people would get dogs, but they would go as far as like what to get the dog and to take care of for the dog, but they wouldn't really know how to really build that bond, is what you're saying.
Right.
Got it. Okay. And
right. And a lot of pet parents, I know the frustrations of pet ownership. I mean, I have that as well. I know when you get a puppy, there's certain things that are going to be frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
House training is probably one of them. Play biting is one of them. Yep. Those are some of the common reasons that people give their dogs up, and they just don't always understand the best ways to go about helping to solve those behaviors. And obviously my goal is to keep the pet with the family. And I think most families would want that too. But there's just so much conflicting information. It's overwhelming when you try to go and search for something. It can really be overwhelming, all the different options and just all the nuances of how you really try to do something. And so just having a resource that is from someone that's been there, has been doing it, and has been training pet professionals how to do it, I thought was an important aspect of Roughly Speaking, and that we could help pet parents with.
So speaking of, as Roughly Speaking as a resource, what's the difference? So what with Roughly Speaking, what will people get that they normally don't get with like a typical dog trainer, like a local dog trainer, or like let's say, there's thousands, of Facebook groups of all these people who like kind of keep in community, send pictures of their dogs, or like a what's the word? Kind of like a Reddit where they like post something, ask a question, and they're just asking the community. What's the difference that they'll get with Roughly Speaking compared to the typical stuff that you see out there today?
I think the biggest thing is that they're getting resources and answers that have been vetted and proven to work. Mm-hmm. So, and from a dog trainer, I would encourage people still to find a local dog trainer, because nothing's going to beat physically working with somebody. But your dog trainer, you don't always have access to them all the time. You usually have one class a week or whatever. With Roughly Speaking, you have access to a Facebook group community that you can ask questions anytime, and you're going to get answers from people who are certified dog trainers who are using one specific philosophy, because I do all positive reinforcement training. So that's going to be the bias of all of the answers that you get. And you're going to get processes that are vetted. Like I said, I myself work with thousands of dog owners, but then we've also worked with hundreds and hundreds of pet care facilities teaching their staff how to manage the dogs. So we just know what works and what doesn't work. So you're going to have you're not going to have to sift through like, what do I want to do, or what do I like, or whatever. And that's true not just for the training, obviously training issues, but just all the other questions, like what do I feed my dog? What are the best things to look at when I'm choosing a dog food? Or should I have them should I be doing any sports with my dogs? Or how can I just have fun with my dogs? So just a lot of those things outside of training that are just going to help you to build a relationship. We're going to offer those as well.
Mm-hmm. Perfect little segue. You mentioned something of dog food. I ask every one of our guests, just because I like to hear everyone's different opinion and why on their choice of dog food. I try to feed my dog as close as I can, as far as financially, to feed them the best. So there's commercial, and then there's like a little more boutique commercial, and then there's cooked, and then there's raw food. Which one do you typically prefer?
I actually feed half and half. So I feed kibble, and I feed half kibble and half raw. Both of them are from companies. Like, so the raw I feed is from Primal, and the kibble I feed is Origin. What I recommend people look at, obviously, look at the ingredients of the dog food and pick a dog food that has as few as possible in terms of preservatives and additives and things that are just added to the dog food to make it look or smell appealing. That's what a lot of additives are added. And then I would look at something that has a protein source as one of the top 3 ingredients. So it's not necessarily like, okay, this is the absolute only brand you should feed. And I do think that different protein sources affect dogs differently. Like, my dog tends to get like his fur tends to not be as good if he's on fish as a protein versus beef, which is just how I had another dog that was the exact opposite. It's same brand of dog food. It's still Origin, but I feed Regional Red because that's all beef based with Origin. They have an entire fish brand as well. So it's a little bit of, how does your dog look? What does the coat look like? Are their eyes shiny and ears clean and that kind of thing? But then within the food itself, I would look, dog food is like people food, where the top ingredients, they're listed in descending weight. So just like when you go get cereal for your child, you don't really want one that lists sugar first, because that means sugar is the most of what's in there is sugar. It's the same thing with dog food. So you want one that has like a protein source listed as one of the top 3 ingredients. And I will say that the more expensive foods, the other thing I would look at is look at how much you have to feed your dog, because what's on the bag, let's say you have a 70-pound dog food and the bag says you need to eat, that dog needs to eat 5 cups a day. That's how much the dog needs to eat to get all of its nutrients. So I know for a fact, if I fed my dog 5 cups of food a day, he would get fat. So a lot of people go, well,
so would mine.
I'm going to feed him less because he's getting fat. But that also means you're not feeding him all the nutrients he needs. So Typically what you see with the more expensive brands is you're feeding a lot less and they're getting all the nutrients. So the whole cost thing you have to look at from how long the food lasts, because the more expensive foods, usually you're feeding less of it. So it tends to last.
Yeah. Yeah. I tend to agree. I was just curious. That's cool to hear. And you know, and how much detail you went into. You know, everything you said is exactly what I went and found on my own as well.
Right.
What's the biggest thing that you see that people miss when they get a dog and then the dog does a behavior that the owner does not like or approve of? What's the biggest opportunity you see that they miss?
That's a great question. I think the biggest opportunity is that dogs do things that work for the dog. So if your dog is doing something that's annoying you, unfortunately, there is something in it for the dog. And you're either accidentally rewarding the dog for that, and that's why he keeps doing it, or the dog is getting rewarded somehow through the environment. So an example would be, this happened with one of my dogs. I used to have a backyard that had a ton of squirrels in it. So my dog would bark at the squirrels and scratch at the door. And I, of course, was like, oh my gosh, you're scratching the door. So I would open the door so that he would stop scratching the door. Well, the scratching got worse and worse and worse. And the reason is I'm actually rewarding him by opening the door while he's scratching the door. So that's like classic 101 dog training. Reward the dog for whatever behavior they're doing. So his reward was to get out the door and chase the squirrel. I was opening the door because I didn't want him to damage it.
Yeah.
But I was unintentionally rewarding him for scratching. So then he just started scratching more. So I had to switch that around to say, okay, I need to get him to sit and back away from the door and then open it, which I started working on that. And sure enough, soon he would run up to the door and sit. And then I would open the door so he could go chase the squirrels in the backyard. So things like that, looking at what is the reward for the dog and how can you change that so that reward isn't happening. Another really common example is the dogs who bark at people that walk by the house, or let's say UPS people or the mail delivery people or whatever. If you don't do anything with that, the dog barks, the UPS man walks away, the dog thinks that he chased him away. Yeah. And so the next time the UPS comes up, the dog's like, last time I barked and he went away. This time I'm going to bark more. And he gets more and more confident. So after like a year of that, you have this dog that's like being a really, really aggressive at the door when the UPS man shows up. But in the dog's mind, he's getting rewarded for that. So again, you have to switch that up and start to understand what's in it for the dog and how can I change that.
So while I have you here, I wanted to ask you this just because, I mean, it's fine, but it's also like something that bothers me more than it bothers my girlfriend. She has I've mentioned on several podcasts, she has I thought it was 17, but it's just about to turn 16, 16-year-old dachshund. Zero training, just because I don't know why. They just were like, they just left it alone. They're like, any of these behavioral problems, that stuff where I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. So
it's not uncommon with small dogs, because with small dogs, like a lot of people just pick them up.
Yeah.
They're being crazy. They just pick them up. Like you're not going to do that with your dog or with my dog.
Right.
Like I have to train my dog because I can't just pick him up so he doesn't bother people.
Yeah. So this dog, my dad, he'll come and take my dog because he has her litter mate, her sister, and we have a property, little farm property, out west, like 20-ish minutes from here. Anyways, anytime he comes over, he barks and he won't stop barking. And one time my friend came and visited and he was barking, and then he, let my girlfriend's dog, lick him and pet him a little bit, and then nothing for the time being that he was there. No barking, no more barking, anything like that. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? My dad has tried to show him his hand, but he keeps barking. What would you do in that scenario to get him to stop barking, even though he's been trained for 16 years to just bark?
Yeah, so that's that's the biggest thing you're working against you, is that there's 16 years of a habit that you're trying to change. So that's always going to take longer. But I would be doing a lot of making the association to something positive. So I've worked with people who bark when people come over, and will find something that the dog really, really likes. Might be food, it might be a toy. And when the person comes in the house, they have that object. So I've literally worked with dogs where there's just like a basket of tennis balls on the outside of the door, and we just practice. And you do have to practice it. You don't want to just do it like your dad comes over once or twice a month and that's the only time you do it. I would be inviting people that can practice this over and over and over, but
That's
knock
really
on the
good.
door, get a tennis ball, walk in, throw the dog a tennis ball, and you start to make that association different. You could use food as well, but sometimes that works better than trying to have the owner doing anything. If the dog's nervous or upset or whatever by the people that are coming in, then walk in, toss a treat, and just keep doing that until the dog starts to go, well, this person isn't so bad. So it is going to take longer because they've had 16 years to practice something else.
Well, I wanted to ask just because I felt like that's probably pretty relatable to a lot of people watching and listening. And I'm going to absolutely implement that as soon as my dad comes, as soon as my dad comes over, I'm going to be like, all right, I'm leaving treats outside because her dog's very food driven. And I'm like, you're going to, as soon as you walk in, you're going to walk up to him and give him a treat. And I know that'll take time.
You can even walk in and toss treats on the floor just so the dog becomes like preoccupied finding those treats that are on the floor.
Yeah, I'll have to hold my dog back because they both are food.
Yeah, because he'll eat all the treats.
Oh my gosh! Yesterday, we were putting prescription medication because Chase is old and Chase has some health problems. So now it's always a hassle to get him to eat his for his antibiotics and stuff. But
right.
My girlfriend left the food out, and I was like filling up my water, not paying attention. And I knew, so I was feeding my dog too. She finished her bowl, but she snuck over to his bowl and started eating. I'm like, hey. So
yeah,
I'll have to make sure to stop that. So tell us about the behavior of dogs from your experience and your perspective. What about them makes them so easy for you to understand?
I think a lot of it is just understanding canine body language. So just understanding, and most people do recognize like when a dog is happy. Most people can kind of go, oh, look, he's all loose and wiggly and, looks friendly, that whole like looks friendly thing. And then I think people usually understand like barking, growling, snarling, all showing the teeth. They really, generally speaking, understand that that's dogs not friendly, not wanting to make friends right now. But there's a whole bunch of behaviors in between those two extremes that are really, really subtle, but also easy to understand if you learn a little bit about canine body language. Those are all the signals that most people ignore. And so I will talk to somebody, for instance, that's had a dog that maybe bit their child, and they call me and they're like, I had no idea and most of the time bites happen with the parent standing within arm's reach of the child and the dog. It's not, well, the child was left alone and the dog was by itself with the child and something dramatic happened. Usually it's the pet parent is standing right there and the child is there and the dog is there, but they don't recognize situations that cause the dog to maybe get nervous, and they don't recognize the stress of the dog. So simple things like the dog shuts its mouth, it's panting, and then the child might walk up to it. The dog shuts its mouth, the dog stiffens, the dog turns its head away. All of those, that's 3 distinct separate signals. The dog has already said, I'm uncomfortable with this child here. So now the dog has the option of either getting up and moving, which some dogs will do, or if they can't go anywhere, maybe they're trapped against a wall or whatever, the dog might show some other displays like growling or snarling or that kind of thing, or might bite. So I really think teaching pet parents to understand some of those really easy to identify signals will help them be better advocates for themselves and for their dogs and for whoever is interacting with their dogs. So that's really, I think, why to me it's so easy. But I've also seen, I've worked with so many dogs that now I can see those things really, really easily and really, really quickly.
That's good. Okay, so real quick, You know, my I'm gonna just give you a little scenario, but my dad is working on this. But his dog Sasha, very high energy dog. We thought because she's kind of nipped at people when my dog's around. It's like we think she's like this is my pack, like you know, kind of like, and so she'll like you know nip at people, and so he's been having to work on that. And what you're saying is she probably gave cleared. So she actually ended up. My second cousin, or so my cousin, her kids, I call them my nephews, but they were at the farm, like doing some fishing. My dad brought Sasha. Sasha was running around because she gets all fired up, looking for rabbits.
Right.
And then she didn't bite him hard, but she bit him enough to scare him. But it was right in front of my dad. But he couldn't even do anything about it. So in that scenario, you're telling me that there was some body language that was maybe there was missed to where you're
Right.
like this dog's obviously either is it territorial or they're like threatened by the kid.
Yeah, most of the time people do say the dog is territorial or protective because they only do it. A lot of times they'll only do it when they're near their pet parents. The reality is most of the time that dog is just fearful. And when it's with the pet parent, it feels like it has backup. So it's kind of like, oh, I can be big and bad now because my dad's behind me and he'll take care of you if something happens. It's usually that more than the dog is truly protecting the pet parent, which is kind of, we like to sort of think of like, oh, he loves me, he's protecting me. But most of the time it's not that. And it is, I will say 90% of the time, it's not a aggressive dog, like a mean dog. It's normally a dog that's scared and they're responding to that fear with nipping. And the good news is that the dog is obviously showing bite inhibition. Obviously we don't want our dogs to bite, but if your dog is biting and it's inhibiting its bite, because let's be honest, that dog could bite really hard if it wanted to.
Oh yeah no,
so it's choosing to nip, so which is good. We just want to try to prevent the dog from practicing that behavior, because practice makes perfect, so we don't want him to learn that. But yeah, there are probably some really subtle signs that she's giving that are saying like, leave me alone. And both the dog needs, you know, to have space, and then the people need to recognize those signals as well to say, just give her some space right now, she's not ready to be petted or interact with her or whatever, and wait till she settles down a little bit.
I felt that was really good. Sorry Dad, if you're listening, to throw you under the bus. I felt like that was a really valuable point because you know, I'm sure my dad's not the only one out there, and you're like, what do I do? You're freaked out. Do I put this dog down? Like I don't know how to get her to stop. I don't know how to manage that. So that's
and a lot of that is just recognizing those signals and just giving the dog some space. Space is really your friend when it comes to dogs. And that might mean for whoever is interacting with that dog, whatever friends are over or whatever, you need to tell them too. Like, she doesn't always want to be petted or hugged or kissed or, you know, whatever. Like, just leave her alone if she is backing up. Basically, if the dog's not approaching you to be petted, then just leave the dog alone. I mean, that's probably the safest thing to say. And obviously that's easier to do with adults than children, but hopefully with your dad's friends, they can help in that situation as well.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, the kid was fine. We literally went to lunch. He just had like a bite mark on him.
Right.
But, and he was a little freaked out a little bit. So,
yeah.
But, okay. So we've talked a little bit off camera about the balanced training approach where like you reward dogs when they do something good and correct them when they do something wrong. Why do you think it is not as effective as more focusing on the positive reinforcement kind of training or redirection with a reward or go ahead?
Right. So I'm actually what's considered a crossover trainer, meaning when I started out training 30 years ago, I did a lot of that balanced training approach. I did prong collar training. I did choke collar training, where the principle was that you asked the dog to do something. If they did it right, you rewarded them. If they did it wrong, you corrected them. I won't say it doesn't work because I trained that way for a while, but I now, like for the past 20 some years, I've been doing positive reinforcement training,
Mm-hmm.
which is really more about setting the dog up to do the right thing and rewarding them when they're right. I think, and there's a whole big long reason I changed, but I'll kind of
Mm-hmm.
put it in a nutshell, is I actually at one point in my training classes, I had dogs that I had trained with the traditional training or balance training approach, and dogs I trained exclusively with positive reinforcement. The difference in those dogs was night and day. So they all knew the behaviors, but the dogs that were trained with positive reinforcement, the relationship they had with their owners, the way they carried themselves, the fun they had in classes, it was totally different. And that was really when I was like, wow, this is like so weird, because it's a completely different personality in the dog.
Wow.
I do think balance training can work, but I think it damages a lot of it will damage your relationship with the dog. And the biggest difference is when you work with positive training, what you're actually getting your dog to do is think on its own
Mm-hmm.
and problem solve on its own. And you're trying to help them by setting up a scenario where they can succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And you can end up training them a lot faster as they get older, because they start to figure out, oh, that wasn't it, let me try this, let me try that, let me try this, and you then reward what the right behaviors are. It's why
Mm-hmm.
you can really do a ton with things that aren't natural to dogs, like agility training.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see people training agility dogs with prong collars,
Right.
and there's a reason for that, because you're trying to get them to do something that's a little crazy, jump over
Yeah.
a certain jump or go through a tunnel. So same thing with like freestyle or any kind of disc work, all of those things that are not what I consider natural behaviors for dogs, you're training with positive reinforcement. And the reason is the dog learns a lot faster as they start to understand the principle. When you train a dog with balance training, you're telling the dog, don't experiment with anything. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you're wrong, you have one choice to be right. Everything else you're going to get punished for.
Ah.
So they end up not thinking. They just end up basically going, I'll just sit here. I'm not going to try anything else.
Yeah.
So it's a
Yeah.
lot harder to train other activities with those dogs. But for me, I really like the fact that I'm working on building that relationship. And the one thing I will add, though, is when you talk about balance training, you say reward the right thing and punish or correct the wrong thing. That doesn't mean positive reinforcement is completely permissive. There still should be consequences
Mm-hmm.
when the dog doesn't choose the right option. But those consequences are usually going to be, you lost access to the reinforcement that you wanted, or you lost access to a location that you wanted, or it's not necessarily something that's punishment based in terms of a physical correction, though.
It's like neutral.
Right.
Got it.
But it could be like, I was working with my dog yesterday on doing nose work. So I'm trying to teach him how to find certain scents, because I want to compete in nose work with him.
Oh, cool.
And I had a handful of treats. If he put his nose in the right place, my hand was opened and he knew he had access to those treats. If he moved his nose, my hand closed. So he went, oh crap, I just lost the chance to get those treats. And he immediately went back to going, I should just keep my nose here longer. So it's him thinking like, do I get the treats? Am I doing the right thing or no? So it's a lot of, it's still going to be controlled, and you're still going to have consequences. Just those consequences aren't necessarily physically punishing for the dog in terms of physical punishment.
Got it.
Like a correction, collar correction, or that kind of thing.
And it's interesting because I also, like someone else, it was a previous podcast guest, the recent one that we did, I had asked a veterinarian. She said, well, you have to think of it this way. Your dog's not human, so when they do something wrong, I think you said this, is like, let's say a dog, you're trying to get, you're practicing recall, right? And you have some e-collar, and you're trying to tell them to come. They're not listening. They walk by a mailbox, and you zap them. They can't tell the difference between being shocked by a mailbox. They got shocked because they're near a mailbox versus not listening to you. They were just sniffing. So
Exactly.
you can't sit the dog down and say, hey, this is why you got punished for that. So
Right.
it's like, it's more, their thinking is cause and effect, like immediate. Like,
Right. Which is exactly that. That's a great example. And the example of dogs that bark at other dogs, when you correct your dog for barking at another dog, most of the times dogs bark at other dogs because they're afraid of them. Sometimes they want to play, but most of the times they're fearful. So they're like, oh my God, a dog's coming. I need to bark to tell them to go away. And now you correct your dog for barking. Have you just made their fear of dogs better or worse. Like now you're basically, now the dog's like, holy crap, every time I see a dog, I'm afraid of them, and my owner flips out and I get pain. So the presence of dogs actually starts to indicate pain for your dog, which is going to, what typically will happen, you'll make them bark from a farther distance. So instead of barking when they're 2 feet away, the dog will start barking when they're 10 feet away and 15 and 20, because they're like, the closer he gets, the more likely I'm going to get, some pain. So it really helps to understand how dogs make those associations and where you can have some fallout in whatever training method you're using. And I'm not saying you can have fallout with positive reinforcement, but the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to have a dog that's fat if you're just not doing it well. So I don't know. I just like building on the relationship part of the training process.
You can slim them down later.
Exactly.
But that's I'm so excited to like re-review this podcast after we finish here, because I've learned so much. So let's talk a little bit more about Ruffly Speaking. How should or how can people sign up for Ruffly Speaking?
Well, they can go to your link. That's probably the best way for them to sign up. The information is at rufflyspeakingdog.com. And there's a monthly subscription or an annual subscription, and you can cancel anytime. When you sign up, you'll immediately get access to the current month's blogs, videos, resources, handouts, whatever it is. You'll get access to a number of free videos that we have done, educational videos that we will have done to help you understand your dog better. And then each month, you'll get access to new material as we release it every month that you're subscribed. You'll also get immediate access to a Facebook group that you can join and jump in there and meet others who are in Ruffly Speaking and ask any questions you might have as well. Well,
and I want to give my own review here. As a member of Ruffly Speaking recently, I just want for those listening to know that this is Robin and her business partner are legit. This program and this subscription is well worth it. There's so much value that they give. I've learned so much just from being in the group for just under a week. Learning stuff that I didn't know before whatsoever, especially even and more so even just on this podcast speaking with you, Robin. So as someone who is a member, it's priceless to me, the value, because my dog's young. I'm going to have my dog for the next, hopefully 10, 12, 15 years. And I've learned so much about building my bond, with my dog. So.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate that.
Where else can people find you on social media as well?
We do have Instagram and Facebook for Ruffly Speaking. So if you go to Ruffly Speaking Dog, and then if you're a business owner, you can also find information at thedoggurus.com about helping your pet care business.
And, for those of you also listening, if you want to sign up for Ruffly Speaking, you can use the link in the description, whether you're on YouTube or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or if you're listening on Spotify. I'll make sure that that link is in the description and you can sign up there. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen. Robin, thank you so much for being on today. I've learned so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, and I hope to have you on again soon. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon.